To hopefully, Dr. Mark Singer, you can get on this time. He was saying he couldn't see that we were actually going live, but and there he is. Okay, good. And Mark, you're the first one here, so let me invite. This is going to work. Okay.
Here we go.
Relief. I don't know what happened. There were about 15 of us in here waiting for you, and I see little messages going, I don't see anything flashing.
That was me.
All right. So anyway, I was just saying that welcome back, and that we're gonna talk about the topic that gets everyone all upset on both sides, parental alienation, and maybe the difference between parental alienation syndrome and real parental alienation, or erasing behaviors, or whatever you want to call it. So Mark, why don't you first introduce yourself formally again for the people that missed the last wonderful interview.
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me back, Lisa, and Chris as well. My name is Dr. Mark Singer. I'm a licensed psychologist in New Jersey. I've been practicing since 1997. A lot of the work that I do is in custody, best interest in terms of evaluations, also risk assessment, parenting evaluations. I do a lot of co-parenting therapy, reunification therapy as well. And since 1998, I've been testifying in court in New Jersey, mostly within family court, dealing with best interests of children, risk assessment of parents. And that's the kind of work that I do.
All right, great. So you're definitely a professional and qualified to talk about this topic.
I appreciate it. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the number one topic that we get with our clients is parental alienation. A lot of them are accused of parental alienation or coaching. So you could talk about, like, what exactly is it?
Sure. Well, parental alienation, there's a lot of myths that go along with parental alienation. The first thing to be clear is that parental alienation is not a psychological or psychiatric diagnosis. There's nothing, the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, has no such diagnosis for parental alienation. There are diagnoses for parent-child contact problems, but the way I encourage people to look at parental alienation, understanding, like I operate in New Jersey, not all courts accept the concept of parental alienation, because the research, like many things, psychology, is mixed. And that's why it's called a syndrome as opposed to a diagnosis, because it's not accepted by everybody in the scientific community. I happen to believe that there are parental behaviors that are alienating behaviors. And I think that's something we'll get back to in a minute. But basically, to understand alienation, I think you have to understand a little bit about how children form relationships with people in the first place. You know, human beings, one of the nice things about being a human being is that we are biologically wired to want to connect to people. I mean, if you think about it, the day we're born, there's not much we can do. We can't eat without help. We can't change our own diapers. We can't make ourselves warm or make ourselves cold. So there's a dependency need that we have from birth, actually before birth, and we come to attach to other people to meet our basic needs. So in the beginning, children have this drive to want to attach to the parents or to other significant caregivers. What alienation is, it's a process where an individual either covertly or overtly engages in behaviors that has a negative impact upon that attachment, upon that relationship. And you deal with a child that goes from having a positive relationship with a parent to maybe the preference where a parent, you know, at different stages in a child's life, a little boy may prefer his mom at certain stages or his dad at certain stages. Same thing with a girl, same thing with a child that doesn't identify to gender. We all have certain preferences as we go along. Preferences are healthy. What alienation is in its extreme is a total detachment from a parent. Now, to be clear, you know, the theory of alienation was developed by this guy named Gardner, and he was very specific that if there's real abuse, real child abuse, you tend to have estrangement where a child may reject a parent because of actual abuse, that's not alienation. That's a child trying to protect him or herself from a parent where, for example, where there's been a judicial finding of physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect, whatever it may be. Alienation at its most severe stage is a total rejection of the parent. It's a total rejection of everything associated with the parent, grandparents, family pets, everything that kind of goes along with the rejected parent. But the root cause of that, according to the theory, is the favored parent, favored meaning through the eyes of the child, the favored parent engages in a course of behavior, either covertly, examples of covertly, moving a child to another country, or that would be overtly, I'm sorry. Example, overtly is moving a child to another country, or covertly, doing little things to have a negative impact upon that child's relationship with the rejected parent, the targeted parent. Examples of little things. I use the term little in quotes because to you and I, they may be little things, but to a 5, 6, 7-year-old child, they're major things. Examples would be bad-mouthing a parent, exposing children to the litigation if they're involved in litigation, where you show the child all negative things about the parent, interfering with the targeted parent's custody and parenting time.
Can you give some examples of that? Because we have, again, that's a murky thing with, well, yeah, I'll let you get into that.
Yeah, with arriving 10 minutes late to a child exchange may or may not be alienating behavior. And I encourage all of us to really focus on a parent's real world behavior. Don't get all caught up with terms like alienation, parental alienation, really the parent's behavior. And what you have to do is you have to look at behavior over time and in different domains. So an example of something little might be a parent showing up 10 minutes late for an exchange. In and of itself, that may not be alienation, but or it may not be alienating behavior. But if it occurs over time and it's combined with other things, oh, I showed up late because mommy always comes late or daddy always comes late, or I showed up late because I took you for ice cream and mommy or daddy don't want you to have ice cream, but when you're with me, it's okay to have ice cream, but don't tell mommy, don't tell daddy, whoever the target may be.
Yeah, great example.
Even other little things. Oh, mommy didn't go, like say you have a mother and a father, you have a child who has a back to school night, there's other children, one parent has to stay home with the child. Oh, mommy didn't go to your back to school night because mommy didn't think it was important. When in reality, mommy's home taking care of the other 3 kids. Those are examples of things that are very, very subtle, little nuanced things in and of itself may or may not be alienating behavior. But when you look at a pattern of behavior over time in different domains, that's when we become very concerned. And what you have to look at too is how the child reacts to that. If the child starts backing away from the targeted parent, that's a problem. That's not an alienated child, though. An alienated child, traditionally speaking, is a child that has gotten so far down the end of the continuum that the parent is totally rejected. The key to it, Lisa, is being able to intervene earlier in the stages where you have a parent who's engaging in alienating behavior. Keep in mind, they may not even be consciously aware of it. They may not get it. But the idea is to intervene early in those stages to reduce the risk of the child moving all the way down the spectrum. Because, in psychology, most psychologists, including myself, operate from the principle that a child's best served by having healthy relationships with healthy parents. So when I say intervene, I mean therapeutic interventions, sometimes even legal interventions, to get the parent who's engaging in that type of behavior to understand the cost of that. But so ultimately what we get to, if you let it persist, you get into a child who resists seeing a parent or refuses to see a parent. And that's a problem because that does not serve a child's best interest well.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, great examples, because that comes up all the time. And with our clients in particular, it's a lot of insidious things like the comments, like, oh, the other one didn't think it was important, or sending the kids to one house and saying, well, this parent won't let you use the computer. I gave them, like, you can at my house, but they're just being difficult. Like mom is just being difficult, or dad's just being difficult, where it's like, they're it's not that.
It's I there's adult stuff and there's kid stuff. Adult stuff kids don't need to know. If a parent thinks another parent's difficult, that's all well and good. But to put that on a child, where a child a child's relationship with a parent could be negatively impacted, does not serve the child well. And it goes against the best interest of the child. And again, the parent engaging in that behavior may not even be consciously aware of it, or they are consciously aware of it. And that, I mean, either way, it's dangerous for a child.
Okay, so you said legal things. We know that this kind of emotional abusive behavior, the alienating behaviors, is really hard to prove in court. So what would somebody do? I mean, they make, documentation of what's happened, but how would they put together some kind of strong case? And then I'm imagining also the impact on the child, but it is so insidious.
It's very difficult to prove documentation. I've worked on cases where people have audio and video recording. Even recordings become problematic because you don't know what happened before the recorder was on or after the recorder was off.
Right, the content.
Very few, in my experience, very few cases result in a child totally rejecting a parent. But I do see a lot of cases where there are alienating behaviors. And if you can identify the specific behaviors through documentation, sometimes parents who are the rejecting parent actually acknowledge it because they don't know they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I tell my child that mom is mentally ill because years ago she was diagnosed with depression, which may all be true, but a child doesn't need to know that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the rejecting parent doesn't even realize they're doing something wrong because they're telling the kid the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Tricky.
It's very tricky. Sometimes collateral contacts, friends, relatives, school teachers, can provide information that can either support or refute an allegation of alienating behavior. But it's very, very tricky to really prove, like, based upon the preponderance of the evidence or clear and convincing. It's very difficult, but really it's emotionally abusive to a child.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, so you as a professional, let's say you see it, you see that it's clear in a certain case that you have. What do you do about it?
It depends on what area of my professional functioning I am doing. If I'm working therapeutically with a family, I would point that out, and I would spend a lot of time with the favorite parent talking about ways of reducing, changing his or her behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I would spend a lot of time with the targeted parent working on how to respond to the child. It's not the child's fault. It's not the child's fault. So blaming the child or arguing, getting into a philosophical debate with a 6-year-old isn't going to bring you anywhere. You can't sit 6-year-old down and say, you know what mommy's saying about me is wrong because of A, B, and C. Doesn't work. So we would talk about ways of empathically responding to a child, to not challenge the child's beliefs, but to paint a picture of yourself that is inconsistent with what the other parent is painting for you.
Can you give an example of that, Mark? Because this is so important.
Yeah. Therapeutically, for example, if I'm working with a family where we'll just say dad is the targeted parent and mom has shared information about litigation or, whatever, has really, tainted the child's view of the parent, and the parent's still having parenting time with the child, what I recommend to the rejected parent is, listen, be consistent. Anytime you talk about mom, the sentence should end with, daddy and mommy love you. Because if you start rejecting the other parent, you put the kid further in the middle, and the child is likely to do what the child needs to do to survive that kind of mix, which is not good for a child or good for you as a parent. But to be really consistent, and whatever picture you think that other parents painting of you, oh, daddy's mean, or daddy's cheap, or daddy doesn't trust you, act opposite to that. Show the child daddy's not mean. Daddy does trust you, and there's ways to do that, right? Hey, listen, you know what? You did really well in school today. You get an extra 15 minutes on your iPad, and you don't sit there with your watch timing the child. You say, you know when 15 minutes is, and if you go too long, I'll come get you. But I trust you. To use the word.
Yeah.
It's a battle you're waging, right, against someone else portraying you a certain way. But if you portray yourself the way you really are, in the long run, maybe not in the short run, but in the long run, as children grow, they see for what it really is. The other advice I give a parent who has been alienated, you have to be patient. Took you X number of years to get to this point. You have very little control over what the other parent's doing. All you can do is control your interaction with the child. So make the most of it. Be patient. Don't get defensive. When the child turns to you and says, mommy thinks you're a piece of, fill in the blank. I understand what mommy says, but you know what? Mommy and daddy both love you. Let's go outside and throw a baseball, or let's go get an ice cream cone, or, whatever you want to do. I think one of the challenges with being the rejected parent is that we get defensive, right? Because it hurts. I mean, it tears your heart apart, frankly.
It does. It does.
But the other thing that I would caution, sometimes rejected parents feed in further to the alienation. You're not going to come over here if you talk to me that way. Huh?
Right. Okay. So I want you to get into that, but we just got a question that's kind of interesting that says, what if I do act the opposite of what's been said about me when my son says that he thinks I'm faking it?
The way to that's actually a great question, and
It is.
you have a smart son. So the way to prove that is just stay consistent, because people can only fake that stuff for so long. If someone's faking it because they have like a personality disorder, eventually that stuff's going to seep through. And if your kid is that perceptive, the child will see the truth. The other thing you have to ask yourself is my son saying this because my son's other parent told him that I'm faking it?
Sounds like it. Usually, right?
You can't sit your son down and say, listen, sweetheart, I'm not faking it. I'm really being sincere. The best way is your behavior. Behavior is worth 1,000 words. Just be real consistent with what you do. And in the long run, that's going to win out. Yeah.
Okay. So you just started talking about something when I interrupted you, and I forgot exactly what it was.
Oh, I had mentioned that sometimes there's actually research on this. Sometimes the rejected parent feeds into.
Yes. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, don't do that. It's a very easy thing to do as a parent. Hey, listen, I'm a parent. We all get frustrated with our children. Nobody's a perfect parent except, obviously, us that are watching this today. But besides that, nobody's a perfect parent. And besides our children, there are no perfect children, right? We all get frustrated. When your child, especially if it's a severe case of alienation, when your child says or does things that really hurt you, do the opposite to what he or she is making you feel. Mom, dad, you're a piece of garbage. Don't come near me. Give the child a hug if you can. Don't get into a fight about it. Give the child a hug. Be really consistent. Because if the child is saying that, the message the child is getting is that you, mom, or you, dad, don't love me. That's what the other parent's telling me. Maybe not those words. But getting. So to show them the love and to show them the consistency, and to also show them, no matter how they behave based upon the alienating behaviors, they should not be punished for that. You have to draw boundaries. But if a kid is acting out because the other parent has, quote unquote, brainwashed them, it's not the child's fault. They shouldn't be punished for it, right? Someone else should be punished for it. And that's presumably why we have a legal system. So don't give the child a reason to reject you. You can still discipline. You can still set your boundaries, which I know it's a tough thing to balance. But don't feed into the child rejecting you by you rejecting the child.
Okay, so I'm thinking of a specific example that we've heard from a lot of people is a child. I'm not thinking of a little kid, but more like a tween teen who starts cursing at the targeted parent or the rejected parent, or physically hitting them.
Yeah.
Like they're just so angry.
Yeah, that's a tough one. You know, physically, obviously we all have to be safe and we want our children safe. I've worked with families where children lash out physically, and sometimes parents call the police, which may sound like a reasonable thing to do, and under the circumstances, pardon me, might be very reasonable to do. But when the child goes home, the child hears, "Oh, daddy called the police on you because daddy thinks you're a bad kid."
Mm.
You know, so you have to kind of balance the risk and reward. My general feeling is that if an older child is lashing out, that's like a 2-year-old throwing a temper tantrum. What do you do with a 2-year-old who throws a temper tantrum? Make sure they don't hurt themselves and let them throw it. So I would try to physically distance myself, give them some space. If it's really severe where they're following you around the house and throwing pots and pans and stuff, obviously, you know, that's presumably what 911 exists, you know, and then you deal with the consequences of that afterwards. And sometimes you have to do that. That's a very difficult thing. I will tell you this, at least in my experience, most children, most families that I've worked with, and I've worked with children that are 7, 8, 9 who reject the parent, and children that are 15, 16, 17 that reject the parent. Most children who reject the parent tend to act out intellectually or verbally, much physically. That would be a very severe case where, you know, the child's really down that continuum, and that's a challenge. I wish I had an easy way to deal with it. I would tell you.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking too. What about destruction of a parent's property?
Yeah, that is also a fairly severe thing. You know, I'm always interested in what property is getting destroyed. Are they ripping up, you know, some work papers, or did they go into mom or dad's closet and destroy a watch that their great grandmother gave them? Oh, because could be some symbolism in that. With that type of behavior, I would recommend that you would do, whether you feel as though you've been alienated or not, you would set an appropriate consequence for that, which is hard to do when the other parent may not reinforce it.
Oh, that's another thing.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's you know, you have to set the consequence knowing that the child's going to perceive you as being mean. But if you don't set the consequence, today it's the papers that the child's ripping up. Tomorrow they're throwing your computer out the window, right? So you have to set the consequence. You have to kind of just suck up the fact that the child's going to perceive this in a negative light. And what I would really, really stress as early in the process as possible, if you can get yourself, the child, and is equally important, the rejecting parent into therapy. Without that rejecting parent participating in a therapeutic process, the child still goes home to the same stuff they came from. You're not going to make a lot of headway.
Yeah, well, I think that's the situation a lot of our clients are in. The rejecting parent is not interested in therapy unless it's just to keep picking.
It's interesting, either not interested, or what I hear all the time is, I'm not doing anything wrong. It's the other parent's problem. My kid loves me. I don't have those problems. My child doesn't throw my computer out the window.
Right. Someone's asking now, what about, is it the same or difference for step parents, assuming they are healthy themselves? And we know we have a whole blended family community where certain people, you know, the new partner of one of the parents feels like they can't do anything.
Yeah, step parents are in a tough spot. You know, I would say, I think the best way, the advice I give families that are blended families, especially blending very much in the beginning, is that I think the best way of dealing with step parents in general is for the child to know that step parents have a very clear role. You know, that a step parent is not their biological parent, but if the family rules are that a step parent can discipline a child and all that kind of stuff, the child needs to know that. If a child rejects a step parent, the general principles that we're talking about still exist. You know, but one of the things I stress I've worked with a lot of families that have split up and that the parents go meet a significant other and they want to introduce that significant other into the family system in a very healthy way. Having that step parent have a relationship with the parent in the other home becomes very important, because if the step has a good relationship with that other parent, the child's relationship is likely to mimic that.
Yeah, that's not, I don't think that that's possible for a lot of people watching this.
I understand that, and it becomes very complicated, because now you have a biological parent in the other home saying to the child, that's only your stepmother or only your stepfather. They can't tell you what to do.
I think a lot of people who will see this that's the situation.
Yeah, and I think that general rule as a step parent of being really consistent and showing the nurturing side of yourself, and for you as a step parent, either married to or with the other biological parent, to have very, very clear rules in terms of what we do in our house, and for that child to know that you as the step parent are supported by the biological parent in that home, regardless of what the other biological parent may be doing.
Yeah, it's so hard. And then I'm thinking again about the discipline issue. This is a constant problem for so many people, where it's like they say, okay, the kid needs to be disciplined, and then the kid goes to the other parent's house, the rejecting parent rewards the child, says that you shouldn't be disciplined at all, like you're perfect and you're wonderful, and they're just so mean. So not only do they not help with the discipline, but they undermine you as a parent.
Absolutely, and that highlights the importance of trying to get that parent, the rejecting parent, into the therapeutic process. Very difficult to do. Frankly, there are programs where, for lack of a better term, reunification camps, where children are put with the targeted parent and they don't have contact with the rejecting parent for a period of time. One of these programs is 90 days, where they you need court intervention. You actually reverse custody for that time period, because the idea is that if I get that child outside of that rejecting parent's household, I'm likely to minimize the impact of that. One of the things that we haven't spoken about, and I don't mean to muddy the water, is when you have more than one child.
No, go ahead, muddy the water.
Very often in families, when you have multiple children, you have a targeted child. Very often it's the oldest child, who usually has the most experience with both parents, right? Just by virtue of age. So sometimes you have one child who rejects a parent, but the other two kids don't. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things to be very conscious of, stuff flows downhill, right? Sometimes that one child who rejects the parent may influence those two other siblings. Mm-hmm. The reverse is true too. Sometimes those two siblings who come home and talk about how great it is to spend time with mom, or great it is to spend time with dad, has a positive impact on the child who is rejecting that parent. That's why being consistent is so important. But this stuff gets very, very complicated, and there's no easy answer. I mean, the best answer is to be able to sit all of these parents down and therapeutically knock some sense into them and show them how this is affecting their children. The one thing I'll say, I know a lot of your members and audience are kind of on the receiving end of being rejected at points in time. There's research that does show that as children get older, especially when they go off to college, and if they do go to college or other experiences, the military, vocational schools, they see how other families function. And a lot of these kids come back later on in life to the rejected parent. Now, it means you have to be extremely patient, and the ride to get there is miserable. But a lot of these kids come back, and there's actually some research that shows, there's some research that has been done on kids that have been alienated from parents. When they get older, the biggest complaint that they have, at least this is according to one author, Amy Baker, the biggest complaint that they have is that the rejected parent didn't try hard enough. And what they mean by try hard enough is not go fight with the rejecting parent. But if you're the targeted parent, it's the idea of trying to stay consistently involved in the child's life. Send a text message, how you doing? You know what some targeted parents do? They don't send their kids birthday gifts because their kids haven't spoken to them in 4 years. Breaks your heart, breaks my heart. Send them a birthday gift. Let them know you're thinking about them. Because at the end of the day, when they get older, kids don't forget. They may put things away and they may forget when it's convenient for them to forget, but they don't forget. The more consistent, the more involved you can stay with them. Go to their parent-teacher conferences. Get on the school portal. Send them a text message. Hey, I saw you got an A in biology. Good for you. Even if they don't respond, because you know these kids are reading the messages. You see kids all the time. As soon as that little phone beep, 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 they pick it up right away.
Right.
So, these are all ways of kind of combating the impact when you have one parent who's behaving in a very inappropriate and frankly a very dangerous way.
Yeah. So I was thinking too, earlier you were talking about how to deal with it when the kids do have contact, but and then what you're talking about now makes me think about older kids who are past college, but they've been separated or estranged for years. Like I know parents who have just completely given up because you know why. So
horrible.
Yeah. So any suggestions? I mean, I know there's no specific answers. I know there's no definite fixes for any of this, but it is heartbreaking. We have clients with different age level kids, and one's really close, one's up and down, still dealing with the parent. The other's an adult and won't talk to them, but still lashes out.
Yeah. You know what? I'm a firm believer that you should never give up on your children. If only because, and it's going to sound terrible. I don't mean it the way it's going to come out. God forbid that child needed a kidney, and you were the only one that could give a kidney. You would give the child the kidney. So if you're not going to give up on your child physically, don't give up on your child emotionally, because the reality of it is when a kid disengages from a parent, you don't know what that child is thinking. All you know is that the child's not having contact with me. I can't tell you the number of times I've worked with older kids. A lot of these older kids start realizing this stuff when they get married and they have their own children. Mm-hmm. Or when there's a death in the family and they go to a funeral and their mom or dad, or a significant, caregiver, they haven't seen in 15 years. And now they see everybody's crying and they realize that I just lost 15 years and here I'm at my great-grandmother or grandmother's funeral, and I don't want it to end that way, right? So what I recommend, if you're that parent and you have that older child, I would still send the holiday cards. I would still call, even if they don't pick up the phone, because they're going to listen to the voicemail. They're going to hear your voice. Mm-hmm. I would still stay involved. And, with older children too, it's the issue of, do you have access to grandchildren? Like, how does that work? Maybe that's a way of kind of reconnecting with your child. Mm-hmm. Your child has a promotion at work, sending them that congratulatory thing. Because what you don't want, it's very easy for a child who rejects you, an older child, I'm talking about an adult child, mm-hmm. to say, oh, it was my birthday today, and if dad cared about me, he would have sent me a card. Even though I don't talk to dad, if he cared about me, he would have sent me the card. It's very easy to say that. So it's very easy for you as the rejected parent to actually make the situation worse without you knowing it, because you don't know what that adult child is thinking. So I would still stay consistent. I would still stay connected.
Okay, so I was going to say, so on the flip side, how do you help kids at different ages, but I'm thinking more like teens, where, so this I guess isn't really alienation, but where the parent has abandoned them and gone off and not been in touch, and then it's not the rejected parent, it's the parent that's left behind. That, how do they explain to the kids like this other person's behavior, which is not loving and not caring and would not give them a kidney?
Right. That's a tough one, and part of the answer to the question is it depends on how old the child is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a 16, 17, 18-year-old child that age may be able to understand some of the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I think at some point it's very important if you have a parent who's abandoned a child. You know, I'm going to sound like a psychologist. I apologize, but
You are. So, I mean, you're allowed to.
I appreciate it. The first relationship kids have is with their parents, right? They come out of the birth canal, and there's usually, you know, a few folks there.
Mm-hmm.
To lose that relationship, those abandonment issues last for life, you know? So at some point, the child has to come to terms with it. For older children, the way to come to terms may be to understand the truth. I've worked with families who grew up where they thought that their father abandoned them, when in reality, their father had been killed, and the mother didn't want to tell a young child, you know?
Oh, gosh.
But at a certain age, you could do that. Where a parent has willfully abandoned a child, you know, you have to help the child understand that it wasn't about them.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't their choice. They did nothing to push mom or dad away. It's about the parent's choice. And the reality of it is sometimes parents, which could be good people, sometimes parents make bad choices.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the child's choice. The other thing with children who are abandoned, I think if you're the parent who is still there with the child, the more healthy relationships you can help that child cultivate, that's a safety net for children. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I might have lost my mom, or I might have lost my dad. Not even abandonment, death and grief, right? I might have a significant figure in my life, but as a parent, the more significant, healthy figures I can surround my child with. That's why, if you look, there's so many cultural differences with this, right? You have some families where you have 3 generations living in the same house. And to some people, it's, oh, that's crazy. Who wants all that? But to a child, that's all protective. That's a safety net. So to be able to, I'm not saying you have to call your in-laws and your parents and have them move in tomorrow. But what I am saying is that the more healthy relationships, school teachers, coaches, dance instructors, Girl Scout leaders, Boy Scout leaders, you know, anything like that, that's one way of helping deal with that abandonment. But if you don't deal with it, those children tend to carry that into other relationships later on. And if they don't have an understanding of how that works, if they think it's about them, it's likely to repeat.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is so helpful. You know, another thing that I don't know if we covered, like we talked about parental alienation, but you and I talked privately about the difference between alienation and just bad parenting.
Yeah. Alienation, you know, and that's why sometimes it's tough to figure out the difference, right? If I scold my kid and I curse at my child, you know, that may be bad parenting. If I say something to my child and I blame my wife for it, that may be bad parenting. That may not be alienation. That's why we really, Lisa, we look at a persistent pattern of behavior over time.
Mm-hmm.
And parenting is usually fairly easily corrected. You know, sometimes all of us do things that probably, you know, Dr. Spock or some other expert wouldn't want us to do. I'm dating myself now, I apologize. But, you know, some of us do those things only because we don't know any better.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us engage in alienating behaviors because we don't know any better either. However, the more severe cases tend to be much more cognitively deliberate, you know, but it's very difficult to distinguish sometimes between bad judgment and engaging in alienating behavior, because they could look the same.
Mm-hmm.
What I would suggest, though, is if someone's behaving badly as a parent, just like with parenting skills, and if you expose someone to appropriate parenting skills and they continue to do that over and over again, well, now you're probably leaning more towards the alienation piece, alienating behavior piece, than just bad judgment. Because if I teach you a better way of doing it and you still reject that way, that's an issue.
Yeah, I'm thinking because parental alienation is always slammed at a lot of people, that what you said about how therapy can help a parent who might be inadvertently behaving that way or doing it on purpose, but it can help correct the behavior. Let's say one of our clients is being accused of parental alienation and they don't think they're doing it. If they offered to go to therapy, like say they have a custody evaluator and they say, you know what, I want to be the best parent that I can be. I think whatever this accusation, whether it's true or not, I'm offering to go to therapy to do whatever I can to make the relationship better with my child and or the relationship with the child and the other parent. Do you think that would be a good suggestion?
I think, professional bias, I think all of us could benefit from therapy, in different aspects. So if you're a parent, whether you're involved in a custody eval or not, I think having a sounding board to bounce ideas off of and to understand, to me, therapy is like playing sports. When you're a kid growing up, you learn from your coach, and the coach teaches you to a certain level, and then maybe you need another coach, a year or two down the road. So having that sounding board to be able to say, hey, listen, this is the way I do it, doctor or whoever. Is there a different way of doing it? Because we all grow up in a family and we all learn to be parents from our parents. Nobody gives us a book when we have a kid say, okay, if you follow this, you'll be fine. So I think for the best interest of a child, having a parent having access to a mental health professional to learn how to do things better. Even, as a parent, you could be doing things really, really good, but you could also do them better, right? So I certainly see that as a positive.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so there was that question that I got that I said I'm going to try to say it a certain way, and I know there's no simple answer. This is a little bit off from the alienation stuff, but we have clients whose kids are being abused in a very bad way, and you can't see it, and the kid is, the parent is concerned that the child's voice is not going to be heard. So is a custody evaluator a possibility for the child as someone to talk to about what's happening? Or is that like, say it's not getting noticed and it's very serious but it's a little kid. Like, what do you recommend in a situation like that? Because the parents, it's one of the most nightmarish things anyone can imagine.
Yeah, people want children to be safe, right? In New Jersey, and I know a lot of states have the same laws. New Jersey is actually a very, very progressive state when it comes to the law. It used to be there were certain mandated reporters for abuse. Today in New Jersey, the law is any person. So, person walking down the street thinks a child's being abused. They're a mandated reporter. So wow. The first line of defense is to get Child Protective Services involved. Depending on the nature of the allegations, sometimes they're more aggressive than other times. Sometimes it's very hard to prove certain types of abuse or neglect, especially with young children. In terms of the custody evaluation, custody evaluators that I know, and myself included here in New Jersey, always look at the issue of child safety. Frankly, it's one of the factors in the New Jersey statute with best interest, the safety of a child and whether or not there's been domestic violence or abuse. So certainly that's something that may come out in a custody evaluation, and certainly it should be a factor that's considered if there's a parent who is abusing or neglecting a child. But the definition of abuse could be very, very subjective too, right? I mean, the extremes are easy to tell. You have a child who gets hit with a belt and has marks on his or her back, that's kind of easy to tell. You have a child, for example, Lisa, I know you and I were talking, and I know how much you love sports, so I'll stay away from sports analogies for a minute.
Keep being sarcastic, everyone.
You have a child who says, well, mommy or daddy, they throw me on the bed. And sometimes I land and it hurts. Is it or is it not abuse? Is it bad parenting? Is it fun parenting where just a child gets hurt? Child falls off a swing in dad's backyard. Is that neglect? Or is it a child fell off a swing? So it's very hard to tell sometimes in an evaluation. What some parents do, frankly, and it gets done in New Jersey, if you have a child who you think has been abused, sometimes people go to court and get a judge to order an evaluation of the child, sometimes an evaluation of the family. A lot of that in New Jersey is done through the child protective folks. But in those evaluations, you know, if there's not a lot of physical evidence, sometimes it becomes very, very difficult. I do, you know, I do tend to err on the side of caution. Children have to be safe, you know. So if you think a child is at risk of abuse or neglect, you know, I can speak to New Jersey, you have an obligation to try to protect that child by telling somebody. But psychological evaluations are limited what they can say. Even if you look at a child's behavior, you know, I work with parents who come to me and say, listen, I think my child's being abused because they're, you know, they're stabbing little Johnny in school with pencils. They're, you know, putting tacks on the teacher's chair. I shouldn't talk about my own childhood. You know, other things as well. There's no one set of behaviors that are unique to abused children, you know? So just because a child is behaving a certain way doesn't mean abuse. But what's important is that, you know, as a parent, you want to make sure that those behavioral issues are addressed. And certainly if it comes back to the issue of abuse, that's certainly something that a custody evaluator would be interested in. You know, I think part of the problem too is that false reports of abuse, that is also abuse. Because here in New Jersey, kids get yanked out of school, DCPP comes in, sometimes the police come in and interview kids. You have people like me who talk to kids. You know, so as a parent, sometimes you say to yourself, you know, I think there may be abuse, but if I report the abuse, especially if I'm in the middle of a custody evaluation, they may say, well, I'm abusive because I'm making false allegations when I don't think they're false allegations. So you're kind of put in a pickle. Again, I don't care what people think about, you know, if I think a child's being abused, I'm going to take the action that I think has to be taken.
Yeah. Oh, that's so helpful. Well, this whole thing has been so helpful. So I'm getting the few minute warnings from Chris that we're almost at an hour. But so before we wind up, how can people find you? You're only, I know, because we asked about you doing one of our clients in another state. You only do New Jersey, right?
I only practice in New Jersey. Yeah, I do custody evaluations where they're based in New Jersey, but people live in other states. I've been to Florida, I've been to Utah. Anyone wants to send me to Hawaii in February, please call me, let me know. But certainly, you know, if you Google my name or you Google West Essex Psychology Center, you get our website. I do have colleagues in my office, and at least I know you met Liz Stillwell. I do have in my office who are also licensed in other states.
Right. And we're going to be interviewing her. So there's going to be a little competition who does the best interview.
You know, I tell people all the time, despite me training Liz, she turned out great. So it was a good thing. No, she's great. I do custody, like I said, I do custody evaluations. As a matter of fact, I think in 2 months I'm going to Texas to do a home visit. So I do travel to other states so long as they're based here in New Jersey. Certainly, if anyone wants to find me, just Google me. You get my phone number, you get my website, and you know, I know, you know, in all seriousness, I know sometimes we laugh here, which I think laughter is good medicine as well. But I know that, you know, we spend most of our time talking about alienation. I know it's such a difficult thing for people to go through. The earlier you intervene, the more consistent if you're going to remember anything from today, besides the fact that Chris is obviously a Seton Hall fan, the earlier you intervene, the more consistent you are, the more likely the children down the road are going to see the truth. So just, you know, hang in there, get the professional support you need for yourself, for the child. If it means having an evaluation to determine if alienation or alienating behaviors are occurring, go for the evaluation. You can certainly do that. But just really hang in there, you know, for two reasons. Number one, if you're on this site today, it means, number one, you love your kids. So you're going to hang in there for your kids. But number two, just like when you brought that child home the first day, you said, what in the world am I going to do with this little thing? Your kids need you as much today as they did back then. They may not realize it, but eventually they'll get there. Eventually they'll get there.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Mark.
It's been my pleasure. Anything else I can do for you, let me know. And tell Chris that Seton Hall has a good shot at basketball this year. They're one of the best high school teams I've ever seen. So they'll do fine. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.